Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from a civil service examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily edition dated 3rd July 2022 and few important topics from the Indian Express Explained section from last week. The topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the time stamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin with our first topic. This topic has appeared at page number 11 in today's The Hindu Daily edition in the FAQ section. This topic is in relation to the recent earthquake which has struck Afghanistan, and that says the very context of this very article. That earthquake was measured at a magnitude of 5.9 on the Richter scale. Now we all know that Richter scale is basically used to measure the magnitude of earthquake. Here you should be very clear that there is a difference between magnitude as well as intensity. The Richter scale measures the magnitude and not the intensity. And because of such a high magnitude, around thousands of people have been killed in Afghanistan and lot more have been injured. As far as the scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic falls directly under the GS1 paper, which mentions the important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes. Moreover, if you go by the previous year question paper analysis, UPSC in 2014 has asked this particular question. The question says that why are the world's fold mountain systems located along the margins of the continents? Bring out the association between the global distribution of fold mountains, earthquakes and volcanoes. That means that all these phenomena, that is creation of the folding mountains, earthquakes and volcanoes, are somewhat related to each other. And the common aspect in all these three things is the margins, that is the boundaries of the plates. So we will start our discussion in this very regard. In today's session, we are going to discuss all the important components of the earthquake. We will discuss the concept of earthquake, how this earthquake is in relation to the plate tectonics theory, which is also known as the soul of geomorphology. Then we will also discuss that why it is so difficult to predict the earthquake. Then we will come to the multidimensional impacts of earthquakes, and in the last we will discuss some of the important National Disaster Management Authority guidelines in association with the natural disasters of earthquake. So let us begin the discussion in detail. First question is that what is earthquake? In simple language, the earthquake is the simple vibration in the earth's crust. This vibration is the shaking of the ground surface, and that happens because of the release of the energy within the earth's surface. Now there are various factors responsible for the vibration and shaking of the earth's surface, and these factors are broadly classified into two categories. One are the natural factors and the other are the man-made factors. What are the natural factors? The earthquakes can occur due to the tectonic movements. Now what are tectonic movements? Now basically our earth's surface has been divided into 7 major compartments and several minor compartments. These compartments are known as plates. Now technically speaking, these plates are the lithospheric slabs. Now the question is that what are these lithospheric slabs? Lithosphere consists of the crust. We all know that there is a threefold division of the earth, that is the crust, mantle and the core. Now lithosphere consists of the crust plus the upper part of the mantle, and this together forms the lithosphere, and this lithospheric slab moves all across the globe in different and random directions under the influence of different forces. This movement is explained well by the plate tectonics theory, which we have read in our geography basics. So because of this tectonic movement, the earthquakes originate in different parts. The second natural factor is landslides or avalanches. Now these are so large scale mass movements that they displace a huge mass of the rocks land, surface, soils, and hence in turn leads to shaking of the earth's surface. Third, volcanoes. Now we all know that creation of the magmas and their upliftment leads to creation of certain fractures, faults or vents in the earth's surface. Whenever these vents are created, which are also known as volcanoes, these fracturing of the earth leads to the vibration and shaking. Similarly, the rock fall is also one of the important factor for earthquake. Then comes the man-made factors. Now, man-made factors are responsible to create the earthquake because of various processes because of which we increase the superincumbent loads. For example, if we built a large-scale reservoirs on the mountain system which is vulnerable, which is weak, the overlying load of those reservoirs on those mountains can lead to breaking of those mountains and hence in turn leading to earthquakes. The best example of the region where reservoir-induced earthquake has happened in India is the Koina. The Koina reservoir has led to creating of the faults in those particular area, and that is why several times the small shocks, the waves of the earthquakes have been experienced by people in that area. Now, where this Koina is located, it is located in the state of Maharashtra. Similarly, constructing the roads, buildings, hotels, etc. on such vulnerable areas, especially the mountainous areas which are tectonically more active, also increase the vulnerability of the earthquakes. The nuclear tests release so much tremendous amount of energy which is capable to shake the earth. Similarly, the mining activities weaken the rock structures which in turn can lead to slumping, rock falls, landslides, etc., in turn leading to the earthquakes. So these are all the natural as well as the man-made factors which are responsible for creating the earthquakes. Now, if we have to do the spatial analysis of the earthquake, that means we need to identify the global distribution of the earthquake. That is the where part. Which are those most vulnerable areas where the earthquake magnitude and intensity is felt the highest. So if you can see in this map, there are three primarily areas. First is along the Pacific margin, which is known as the Circum-Pacific Belt Zone. Second is the Mid-Atlantic region, which is the region of divergence and creation of the mid-oceanic ridges because of the continuous volcanic eruptions. The third is the mid-continental belt, in which lies our Himalayas also. This is the alpine belt created because of the continent-continent convergence. Now this whole map shows us the three primary zones of the global earthquakes, that is the Circum-Pacific Belt Zone, Mid-Atlantic Belt Zone and Mid-Continental Belt Zone. Now taking forward the conceptual part of the earthquake whereby we have discussed all the natural factors, let us understand in detail that how the tectonic movements are responsible for creating the earthquakes. Now the plate tectonics theory tells us that primarily there are three types of plate boundaries. One is the convergent boundaries, second is the divergent boundaries, and third is the slide past boundaries. In the convergent boundaries, there are two plates which move towards each other and they converge at certain point or boundary. The heavier plate subducts and the lighter plate uplifts. If one of these plates are continental in nature, then young fold mountains are formed. And if one of the plates are oceanic in nature, then volcanoes are formed. But it is to be understood here clearly that the subduction is not a very smooth process. There is a large scale interlocking between these two plates. And as far as this interlocking exists, that is, these two plates, for example, are locked over here, but because they are trying continuously to move downwards, a certain point comes when this force overcomes the shearing resistance between these two forces. This you can understand by the fact that if you stretch a material up to its elastic limit, you will be able to stretch it. But as soon as you cross this particular elastic limit, this material will break. Similar thing happens here also. As soon as the shearing resistance is powerful, there is interlocking. And as soon as the force overcomes that resistance, there is a breaking, and hence there is a release of tremendous amount of energy. This energy is transferred across the earth in the form of seismic waves. Now these seismic waves are of various types. Majorly there are primary waves or the secondary waves. Primary waves are the first one to strike the earth's surface, and then comes the secondary waves. Both of these are the body waves. Similarly, at the divergent boundaries also, because there has been created a vent over this particular area because of the continuous upliftment of the magma, this plate gets fractured and faulted, and hence they move in opposite direction. And because of the creation of these faults and vents at this particular point, these regions also experience the earthquakes. The least intense earthquakes are experienced at the slide past boundaries, because here the plates are not converging or diverging, but they are just passing and touching through each other. That is why the seismic waves which are created in this particular area are less intense. And because of this very fact, the release of energy is also very less. Here we do not find at all the volcanoes, but earthquakes are formed on all these three boundaries, that is the convergent boundaries, divergent boundaries, as well as the slide past boundaries. And we all know that earthquakes every year at several locations lead to a huge loss of life and property. Then the question arises that why we do not have the early warning system for these earthquakes. There is a reason for it, because still we are not able to predict the earthquakes accurately. We know the forces responsible for earthquakes, we know the most vulnerable regions of the earthquakes, but still we cannot predict the earthquake's exact timing, that when will it strike us. That is why we do not have very efficient early warning system. So now let us understand that why it is so difficult to predict the earthquakes. First of all, we understand that the earth is non-homogeneous, that is heterogeneous. And we also know that seismic waves, which we have discussed, that P waves and S waves, they travel across the earth. And because of non-homogeneous structure, the behavior of the seismic waves is also non-uniform. The variable material properties, for example density, do not allow the seismic waves to have a linear path. And that is why, because now the waves are randomly distributed, they are not following the linear path, we do not know that where these waves will strike. Secondly, the earth has several uncertain movements also. For example, the earth wobbles. Similarly, there is a continuous movement of the liquid iron in the outer core boundaries, which leads to non-uniform magnetism in the earth. And third is that these tectonic plates move at a very slow rate, which is generally imperceptible to human eyes. And the interlocking period between these plates are so long that the machines are not able to exactly predict that when the shearing resistance will be overcome by the shearing forces, and hence the energy will be released. So these are the three primary reasons which still makes the exact prediction of the earthquake difficult. In this line, now we should understand that what are the multifold impacts of these earthquakes. Now the first important impact is the liquefaction of the soil. Because of the continuous vibration and shaking of the earth, several granular materials, they come in contact with each other and gets further reduced in size, and a time comes when they are transformed into the liquid particles. And several other natural disasters are linked together. For example, the landslides can cause the earthquakes, and earthquakes in turn can cause the landslides also. Similarly, the under ocean earthquakes, if they have a very high magnitude and they are able to displace the ocean floor vertically, then tsunamis can originate. These earthquakes can also lead to floods, because the vibration in the earth can topple the mountain or plateaus, can increase the rate of erosion and weathering, and hence the rivers will bring more sediments with them. These extra sediments can lead to clogging of the river channels, and hence the floods can occur. The earthquakes can also lead to fires, And all these things lead to huge loss of life as well as property in different countries. So now comes the NDMA guidelines that if the earthquake strikes you, what you should do. First of all, be patient and calm because you are living in the high seismic zones. It might happen that you get impatient when earthquake strikes you. So the first thing is that you have to be patient and calm. Then you have to switch off the gas, electricity and water connections. Further, because you know the basics of the plate tectonics theory, so you can understand that once the earthquake has struck you, there can be aftershocks also. So be prepared for them also. Next, we must focus on building the earthquake resistant buildings. We must follow the building bylaws specially designed for the geologically sensitive areas. We must conduct the regular soil testings on especially the mountainous areas so that we can know their strength and we can know their vulnerability of slumping or liquefaction. Next, we must also establish several GPS stations in the seismically active areas. And also, we must strengthen our communication lines when the earthquake strikes in particular area. So all these things must be kept in mind whenever the earthquake strikes. It helps us to better manage and prepare for the earthquakes and further help us to follow the disaster risk reduction principles as outlined by the Sendai framework. So that's all for the earthquake, and now let us revise the topic in brief once again. Initially, we discussed the concept of the earthquake, that what exactly is the earthquake? It is simply the vibration and shaking of the earth's surface. Then we discussed that what are the various factors responsible for the earthquakes. These factors were divided into two parts, that is natural factors as well as the man-made factors. Then in detail we analyzed that what is the relation between the plate tectonics theory as well as the earthquakes. We understood that the earthquakes can occur across all the three plate margins, that is the convergent boundaries, divergent boundaries as well as the slide past boundaries. In this line, we discussed that why is it so difficult to predict the exact timing of the earthquakes. The difficulty is on account of the heterogeneous material properties, uncertain earth movements, and the longer spans in which the plates move. Then in the last, we discussed the impacts of these earthquakes and how these earthquakes are interrelated to the other disasters like landslides, tsunamis, floods, as well as fires. And in the last, we discuss the NDMA guidelines which you should keep in your mind whenever the earthquake strikes you in order to reduce the loss of life and property. This topic has appeared at page number 12 in today's The Hindu Daily edition, and this topic talks about an important location, that is the Black Sea. Further, it also talks about an important island which is lying in the Black Sea, which is known as the Snake Island. The latest context of this island being news is the Russia-Ukraine war. However, from the prelims examinations perspective, we must be aware about the certain key facts related to the location of the Black Sea as well as the Snake Islands. Now, if you closely look the map, Black Sea is bordered by six countries. First, Ukraine. Second, Russia. Third, Georgia. Fourth, Turkey. Fifth, Bulgaria, and sixth, Romania. If you closely look at this specific area, that is Moldova, though when you look at the world map, it might appear that it touches the Black Sea, but in reality, it does not. Further, along with the Black Sea, there are some other important seas as well. For example, the Sea of Azov, Sea of Marmara, and the Aegean Sea. Now, all these seas are interconnected through the straits, and these straits are also important. The Sea of Azov and the Black Sea is connected through a strait known as the Strait of Kerch. Similarly, the strait between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara is known as the Strait of Bosporus. Further, the Snake Islands is also lying in the Black Sea, which lies near the Danube Delta. Now, Danube is an important river in this particular region, And this snake island is being controlled by which country? Ukraine. So these are the key facts related to the Black Sea, Snake Islands, Sea of Azov, and some important straits in this particular area. There can be a question in preliminary examination from this very important region. Now this news item has appeared at page number 5 and it says saving the Chenkurinji from the climate change. Now this Chenkurinji is a type of a tree and that is why it is of high relevance from the prelims perspective. If you go by the previous year question paper analysis, there have been questions asked in the prelims related to the specific species or the national parks and biosphere reserves in which these species are found. For example, in UPSC 2019, the question was asked in relation to the Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve. The question said that which of the following are in Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve? There were names of various sanctuaries and tiger reserves given in 4 options and you had to find the correct option for this. In this relation today we will discuss the important aspects of Chenkurinji as well as the areas where these are found. Now the Shendulni Wildlife Sanctuary, which you all might have heard, derives its name from the Chenkurinji, and this Chenkurinji is a species which is endemic to the Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve. This particular species is known to have several medicinal properties like it is used to lower the blood pressure and treat arthritis. In front of you there is a tabular format whereby some important key facts related to the Shendurni Wildlife Sanctuary as well as the Agasthamala Biosphere Reserves have been given. First we will look at the facts related to the Shendurni Wildlife Sanctuary. Now this wildlife sanctuary is a part of the Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve. The temperature in this wildlife sanctuary varies from 17 degrees Celsius to 35 degrees Celsius. Further, it also has a very high variation in topography because the topographic altitude in this area ranges from just 100 meter to 1550 meter. And at this particular height, the highest peak of this wildlife sanctuary is Alvar Kurichi. And now because we know that this wildlife sanctuary is located in southern India, that is the parts of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, we can expect a high rainfall in these areas. That is why the annual rainfall varies from 2600 to 3000 millimeter. It has a huge variety in the forest types also. It has tropical evergreen forests, semi-evergreen forests, moist mixed deciduous forests, swamp forests, subtropical hill forests as well as certain grasslands. Now we will look certain key facts related to the Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve. These are located in the Western Ghats and that is why they are also the biodiversity hotspots. In this biosphere reserve there are 3 wildlife sanctuaries. One is the Shendurni, second Peppara and third Nayar. This biosphere reserve has a huge cultural significance also because it is home to the Kanni tribes. Now these tribes are also very famous and the areas of these tribes are Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Further, this biosphere reserve is also mentioned in the Hindu epic Ramayana and that is why it has become a famous site for the Hindu pilgrimages. This biosphere reserve encompasses the tropical forest ecosystems, that is all these types of forests which lie in the Tirunelveli and Kanyakumari districts of Tamil Nadu as well as Tiruvananthapuram and Kollam districts of Kerala. So these were the certain key facts related to the Shendurni Wildlife Sanctuary and Agasthamala Biosphere Reserve which will help you in your prelims examination. Now we will move towards our next section which is the explained section from the Indian Express newspaper. Under this section, the very first topic is in relation to the CAPSTONE which is NASA's newly launched satellite. In this session we will discuss certain key facts related to this very mission. Now CAPSTONE has a very technical full form which stands for Cislunar Autonomous Positioning System Technology Operations and Navigation Experiment. In our language, the CAPSTONE is a microwave oven-sized cube satellite which weighs just 25 kg. So first of all, what is CAPSTONE? It is a CubeSat which is launched by NASA
under its ongoing Artemis program. Now, this Artemis program is specifically dedicated to the lunar exploration. Now, these are the key facts. Okay, so Capstone will be dealing with the lunar exploration, and this satellite will move in the halo orbit. Now, this will be the Capstone orbit. If you closely analyze this one, this is the Capstone satellite which is revolving around the moon, and here we have Earth also. Now, this is basically an elliptical orbit which is in elongated manner. These orbits are formally known as near rectilinear halo orbit, that is the NRHO. These orbits are those which are influenced by the gravity of two heavy bodies. In this very case, these two heavy bodies are Moon and the Earth. The gravity of both these heavy bodies interact with each other, and they form a middle path whereby both the gravities become equal, and that is why this path is the most stable path along the moon. That is why it's written that the influence of these two bodies helps make the orbit highly stable, and because of this high stability, it also reduces the amount of propellant which is being used to fuel the capstone. Further, the capstone will enter the NRHO, where it will fly within the 1600 km of the moon's north pole. That is the nearest possible distance. This one will be 1600 km, and the farthest distance, that is this one, will be around 70,000 kilometers. Further, this spacecraft will repeat the cycle every 6.5 days and maintains its orbit for at least 6 months. So again, Capstone is a CUBE satellite of NASA under Artemis program for lunar exploration, which is having a halo orbit. This orbit is stable because of the interaction of the gravitational forces of two heavenly bodies, that is Moon and the Earth. The nearest distance of the capstone to the moon will be from its north pole, and it will be 1600 kilometers, and from the south pole it will be having 70,000 kilometers, which is the farthest most point. It will have a repeated cycle of 6.5 days and will be there for a total of 6 months. This topic is in relation to the solar energy. The topic reads that why Telangana's floating solar plant is greener than the ground mounted ones. So as you can see that this topic is restricted in the sense that it will talk about the floating solar plants. The context of this very news article is that recently India's largest floating solar plant has been fully operational at the Ramagundam in Telangana's Pedapalli district. So the largest floating solar plant lies in the state of Telangana. And as we all know that NTPC has set a target of producing 60 gigawatt capacity through renewable energy sources, constituting nearly 45% of its overall power generation capacity by 2032. Now this fact is very important and can be used at several places in your GS3 as well as essays. Now in this session we are going to discuss the merits as well as demerits of the floating solar power plants. First of all, these solar plants are established over the water bodies like canals or other wetlands, and that is why they do not require any extra land as is the case with the ground mounted solar plants. One of the biggest challenge to establish the ground mounted solar plants is that there is lack of availability of adequate land resources, and that is why this challenge has been overcome by the floating solar plants because they can be built on the existing canals and do not require other land spaces. Second, because there is continuous presence of water underneath those solar plants, this water keeps these solar plants cool and reduces the heat losses in these plants and in turn increases the efficiency. Further, because the canals or the water bodies are covered by the solar panels, hence it reduces the evaporation rates and saves the water in those canals. This water can further be used for generating the hydropowers. Further, this also reduces the algae bloom and it avoids the shading also. Now, because it avoids the shading, thereby it increases the efficiency of the solar plants. Now we will look at certain demerits of these solar plants. First and the foremost demerit is that they have higher initial installation cost when compared to the ground mounted solar plants. Second, this requires a higher specialization. It requires a niche photovoltaic cells, and that is why the amount of specialization and the human skills required in the floating solar plants are way greater compared to the ground mounted ones. Further, this technology is still a new one, and that is why a lot of research and development work has yet to be done. And last, again, because these plants are mounted over the water bodies, so there are very high chances of corrosion. So these merits and demerits must be taken into consideration while doing the analysis of the floating solar plants. Nevertheless, the fact is that the largest floating solar plant in India presently lies in the state of Telangana, and it has the capacity of 100 megawatt. Our next topic is in relation to the recently launched ISRO's POEM platform. Now, if we go by the current context of this very news article is that recently Indian Space Research Organization ISRO has achieved the feat of successfully launching the PSLV Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle PSLV Orbital Experimental Module, which in short form is known as POEM. So that is why you need to be aware that if the question comes in regard to the poem in relation to the ISRO, so that is something to do with the satellite launch vehicles. Now let us discuss that what exactly is this. But before that, we should understand that the topics related to the science and space are very important in the preliminary examinations. For example, in UPSC 2018, the question was asked like this. With reference to the India's satellite launch vehicles, consider the following statements. There were three statements given. PSLV launched satellites useful for Earth resources monitoring, whereas GSLVs are designed mainly to launch the communication satellites. This statement is correct. Satellite launched by the PSLV appears to remain permanently fixed in the same position in the sky. This statement is incorrect. GSLV Mark III is a four-stage launch vehicle with the first and third stage using the solid rocket motors. This statement is also incorrect, and hence you have to find the correct statement. So option A, that is the one only, is the correct answer. This shows that you must be aware about the key facts related to the space missions of ISRO's and the various technologies which are being used in that. So in this very line, we will take our today's session forward. Now, what is POEM? POEM is a platform that will help to perform in-orbit experiments using the final stage of the PSLV. Now, PSLV is a four-stage launch vehicle which uses the alternate fuels in alternate stages. Okay, so the POEM will help ISRO to conduct in-orbit experiments using the final stage of the PSLVs. Now, the final stage of PSLV is very important because it has a significant difference from the first three stages. The difference is that the first three stages of the PSLVs fall back into the ocean, but the last stage, which is known as the PS4, does not fall back into the ocean. Rather, they end up as a space junk. They end up as space debris. However, in the PSLV C-53 mission, this fourth stage, which earlier used to remain as space debris, were utilized as a stabilized platform to perform the experiments. In this very line, this POEM gains significance. The POEM will derive its power from the solar panels as well as the lithium-ion batteries. It is to be understood that this is not the first time that this technology is being used. ISRO had first demonstrated the capability of using PS4 as an orbital platform in 2019 with the PSLV C-44 mission. And you might have heard about the Microsat-R and the CalAMSat satellites, which were very small satellites and they were sent to their designated orbits. So the POEM is the facility which will allow the ISRO to conduct in-orbit experiments using the fourth stage of PSLV. Now, what are the key facts related to the PSLV? It was the first operational launch vehicle of India which was launched in 1994, and this was developed to launch the remote sensing satellites into the sun synchronous orbits. As we have already discussed, that PSLV is a four-stage vehicle and it uses alternate combination of the fuels. The first and the third stage use solid fuels. Second and the fourth stage use the liquid fuels. The strap-on motors are used in the first stage of the PSLV, that is the solid stage. Further, during the first stage, additional thrust is also required because during the first stage, the launch vehicles have to overcome the resistance which is provided by the air in the atmosphere. So, in order to overcome that resistance, this additional thrust is also given to these launch vehicles. These PSLVs can deliver different payloads in different orbits. It can deliver 3250 kilograms to the lower Earth orbits, 1600 kilograms to the Sun synchronous orbits, and 1400 kilograms to the geosynchronous transfer orbits. That means that as the height of the orbit increases, the capacity to carry the payload of the PSLV reduces. So that was all about the PSLV as well as the recently launched ISRO's POEM platform. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS is in front of you. The question said that central government has taken which of the following steps and why? Statement 1 is increase the custom duties on gold to reduce the current account deficit and ease the inflationary pressure on Indian rupee. Since you have to find the correct answers, so statement 1 is correct. Second, levied special addition excise duty on domestic and imported crude oil as domestic crude oil producers sell crude oil to the domestic refineries at a lower price than prevalent international market rate. This statement is incorrect and hence option A is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is in front of you. Snake Islands lie in which of the following seas? A. Black Sea, B. Andaman Sea, C. Caspian Sea, or D. Sargasso Sea. So that's all for today. All the very best and study hard.